So welcome back from the break. We have another and yet even more expanded, esteemed panel here this afternoon to keep your attention as we deal with some real issues with real life, with real people. And so we're honored today to be joined by Administrator Dave Pekoski, 7th Administrator of the Transportation Security Administration, one of the best agencies in the country, of course, and the longest serving administrator. So my hat that I don't have on is off to Administrator Pekoski for not only his perseverance, his professionalism, and also his patience for dealing with things that can be challenging at times, dealing with over 2.5 million people a day traveling, and that's just in the aviation sector. Ollie, good to see you. The Deputy Administrator, congratulations. All those good things. So Administrator Pekoski had a long career in the Coast Guard and in the private sector, so brings a wealth of experience. Continuing, did what, 18 months as the acting deputy secretary for DHS, but who is counting? So all those things. So another Coast Guard connection is Gary Tomasula, the Vice President for Corporate Security, Chief Security Officer of American Airlines. Spent career 27 years at the Coast Guard. Yes, Coast Guard. And then also in the private sector at American, also spent time at the White House and on the Hill in terms of the National Security Council, and so has the big picture in terms of how things can and should work, and probably a few insights into times when they did not work in the government. Of course, they always work in the private sector, so that's a different issue. Also joined by Tristan Brown, who is the Deputy Administrator of the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration. And if you can say that quickly, you get 10 extra bonus points. So tweet that out. And so Tristan, welcome. He's been there since the start of the administration and sometimes performing the duties of the administrator. And so another challenging position for those of you who have been officials performing the duties of or in an acting capacity. And then Patty Cogswell, who we all know so well, Deputy Administrator of TSA, held, I think, 6 or 7 positions in the Department of Homeland Security before that, and then, of course, time on the Hill and doing things in the private sector, Guidehouse now, for 3 years plus, and just seeing the growth of Guidehouse and providing services to many of you and to the government and others. So with that, please welcome this panel.
Thanks, John.
We are very happy to have this distinguished panel here today. I get to have extra fun because I have known all of these gentlemen for quite some time. Tristan is my newest friend. We've only known each other for, what, year and a half? But with that, I am looking forward to a very engaged conversation across the panel. I wanted to start with just a little bit of a setup. Today's conversation is primarily focused on collaboration, government, industry, across the private sector, because we all are focused on a number of these emerging threats that are out there. My personal favorites are cyber, insider threat, and counter UAS, but who's counting? I want to spend a lot of our time today looking at different vantage points you each have against these problem sets, where you have seen that collaboration work, how do you see it going forward, where can we continue to grow, build, develop, using the best of what we've learned along the way. So with that, I want to start with just maybe setting the foundation for this conversation. Over my career, I often found that in order to have those conversations, you first had to start with a common understanding of risk. Suzanne nicely said it for us earlier. It's a combination of threat, vulnerability, and consequence. And if people in those conversations are not correctly agreeing on what the threat is, much less the vulnerability or consequence, their ideas about what to invest in solving, either preventing or mitigating the response, widely differ, and that's where problems come in. So getting that agreement on those fundamental pieces is sort of essential to the entire thing. So I might just start with, from all of you, we are at this moment in time, especially with cyber, but please take it as you will from there. How do you see these conversations progressing now, especially post-colonial pipeline? How has that changed the nature of the conversation, and where do you see it going? Happy to start with you, Tristan, if you'd like.
All right. Well, thank you so much, and thanks for having me. I'll just really briefly, the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration is a mode of transportation, probably a lesser known mode of transportation within Transportation Security Administration's jurisdiction and the Department of Transportation. But we oversee about 2/3 of the energy that's transported and consumed in the United States via pipeline, and also the transportation of other hazardous materials. We oversee the safe operations, maintenance, design, and construction of pipelines, not cybersecurity or physical security, but we work very closely with the TSA to collaborate and ensure, because while there's a defined line in our jurisdiction, that line obviously is meaningless when we're trying to protect our nation's critical infrastructure. And so, to get to your point about risk and mitigating risk, I think Colonial Pipeline didn't just teach the pipeline sector, but really provide an example for other transportation sectors and critical infrastructure sectors about collaboration. And I think our agencies and the private sector have collaborated well before, and we're very proud of that. But I think it's a whole new level of collaboration that we're operating in now. And I think as far as mitigating risk, when there is collaboration on emerging threats, whether it's up to the minute, hour, day, or month, as those risks emerge, the communication between government agencies, governments, and private sector, and between the private sector itself, is really what we're trying to foster. And I think, hats off to Administrator Pekoski and your team, because I think you've set the tone for that, and we're just continuing that along.
No, thanks, Tristan. And let me begin by thanking John Pistol for the intro, but more importantly for setting the foundation. One of the many administrators in TSA who really took a brand new agency formed in 2001 with a huge mandate, particularly the mandate to operationalize the entire thing by the end of 2002, and then to further develop it as a mature, large operating agency in the U.S. government. John is the father of TSA PreCheck, so all of you PreCheck members, you should thank John, because he was the one who did the risk analysis and made the decision that, hey, with trusted travelers, they represent less risk to us overall, and so we can tailor our security procedures based on that. And just to give you a little bit of an update, this organization had recommended to us, as did the HSAC, to see what we can do to merge the global entry and TSA PreCheck programs together. We've been doing a lot of work on that of late, and hopefully we'll have more things to announce over the next several months. But the desire is absolutely there. The Secretary is 100% behind doing it, to be able to create, rather than a TSA and a CBP Trusted Traveler program, to create a DHS Trusted Traveler program. I think that would benefit certainly all of us, and it would definitely benefit travelers. And really, from my perspective, to just go back to John's work on PreCheck, right now in our screening checkpoints, depending on which airport, but if I just made an overall average of the airports that PreCheck is a standalone operation, not part of our blended lane process, there's between 25 and 30% of our travelers are TSA PreCheck travelers. I'd really like to see that more like 70% and 30% standard lane passengers, because that goes to the issue that Patty raised, is how do you assess risk and apply your operational procedures based on a thoughtful and well-shared risk assessment going forward. And I think we can get to that point, given the risk work that we've done to date. To use the cyber example that Tristan raised, I think is a really good one on threat sharing, right? Because as you look at vulnerability and consequence, sometimes the owners and operators are going to know more about their individual vulnerability and the consequence of a successful attack on their systems. Where the government comes in most primarily is on the threat identification and threat assessment. And what we did when we first saw this cyber threat emerging for transportation systems, and it's important to remember that for TSA and for Coast Guard, two agencies within DHS, we actually both started in the Department of Transportation. And so what happened in 2001, Secretary Norm Mineta and Deputy Secretary Michael Jackson got together with the mandate to, hey, how do you stand up this security organization? And essentially what they decided to do, in very simple terms, was to take the security functions in the existing DOT modes and map them over into TSA. And so there's always been a very strong connection between TSA and Coast Guard and the Department of Transportation modes, and that continues through to this day. But what we did in cyber when this first materialized in really May of 2021, something rather unusual for government agencies to do, and my hat's off to the White House for really helping us substantially with this process, was we invited the chief executive officers of first pipeline companies, then rail companies, and then airlines and airports into the White House for a highly classified threat brief of, hey, this is the threat that we're seeing, because we wanted the CEOs to understand early on what the threat was and how significant we felt it was, because we knew that their CIOs and their CISOs would soon be knocking on their doors saying, hey, I'm going to need this additional resourcing, or this might change some of our business processes. I need to talk with you about that. That's kind of unusual to do it that way. And some CEOs really challenged us on it. They would say, hey, if this is about cyber, I don't know much about cyber. And candidly, not a lot of us did. I don't know a lot about cyber. I really can't participate fully in the conversation. But it really wasn't about cyber as a discipline. It was about cyber as a threat vector and where it was developing, and the things that we felt needed to happen. I think having done that, when I think of all that the government agencies and the owners and operators of critical infrastructure have done over the past 2.5 years, that was probably the most important first thing for us to do. It really kind of changed the tone of the relationship between a regulator and a regulated party, and it set the table for really good collaboration going forward. And to Tristan's point, I appreciate his comment. I would provide the same back, is that when you run a business, you have safety concerns and security concerns. Those are not necessarily always completely separate and distinct from each other. And some things you do on a safety side can have a security impact, and vice versa. So we felt it was important that we represent that two sides of the same coin paradigm, if you will. One side safety, one side security, and really work very closely with our safety partners. So we've done the same with the FRA, Federal Railroads Administration, and obviously with the FAA on all the aviation issues. And I think that provides some level of comfort to the owners and operators of critical infrastructure, because they know that the federal agencies that have oversight over their operations have had a conversation, and it's not like we're operating independent or unknowing of what our safety partners might have as a concern. So Tristan was the first one up with pipelines in terms of where we saw the threat start to manifest itself, and where we knew the threat intelligence was leading us in terms of a priority. And it was his partnership with us, particularly in the first year, where we did what's pretty typical for a government agency. We saw a threat, and we put out a whole bunch of very specific things that we require pipeline operators to do. What happened in that intervening year was really incredibly positive, and I would suggest has changed the trajectory of regulation, certainly in TSA and in other agencies as well, because it's reflected in the National Cyber Strategy. And that change was to say, hey, rather than being very prescriptive about what we do, let's be more performance-based, so that we aren't asking an owner-operator to completely change their business model or completely change things that they might already have in place, just because we happen to identify another way to potentially get to the same outcome. And so we worked on that over the course of a year. It was really important to have PHMSA at the table as we were having those discussions with the industry. And then within a year came out, we went from a very prescriptive-based set of requirements to a performance-based set of requirements. And really, to think about it in terms of what followed, we used the very same process that we stepped through in the pipeline sector, with the rail sector, with airports, and with air carriers. So I appreciate the partnership, Tristan, with you and your team. I think it's been one that, as I look at my government service, it's a really great example of federal agencies doing something different, doing something that we've actually talked about for a long time, but it's hard. It's harder to do it this way, but I think the outcome is going to be far superior to the path we were originally on. Thanks.
Gary, I don't know if you want to talk about this as a airline executive or in your former hat or both.
Well, I'll focus on the first part. I think, as the administrator noted, I think we benefited from being later in the process, although the process continues. And I probably should preface my remarks. Want to thank the administrator and John Pistol as well, but more currently, Administrator Pekoski. At the head of an agency, you set the tone. And the level of collaboration, I think, between the aviation industry, at least from a security community standpoint, has been incredible. And we've always got an open ear with the administrator, a reasonable approach. And like he described, more of an outcome performance focus has been the benefit of cybersecurity. And cybersecurity for the aviation industry has been something we've been focused on for years. It's nothing new to us, but we're part of critical infrastructure. The trust of not only the government, but our passengers from a security and cyber standpoint is critical to our operations, critical to our organizations. No one wants to fly on an unsafe, unsecure, or not cyber protected airline. So it's the number one focus we have from a security perspective right now. We've been working very closely with TSA. Having worked in government for many years, especially at the National Security Council, seeing that interagency process, it's been a challenge for me. I'll admit it, talking to some of my colleagues within the aviation industry, the process is ugly. I'll be honest, from a regulatory standpoint, but I believe it's necessary. It needs to be an informed process where government and the private sector work together because we have a shared interest in addressing the threat.
I will continue with that theme. I know it's been my experience that quite often when these threat streams happen, the first thing that happens is you all sit together and it is really kind of uncomfortable,
Yes.
right? There's that, my fun conversations I used to have, especially with the pipeline side of the house, was, are they actually targeting me? Why would they target me? And then, oh, I'll just turn off that one node and I've got plenty of redundancy and it won't cause any problems. Well, I think we saw with Colonial that wasn't the right informed mindset, right? That idea of a cascade when it wasn't even the operational system changed the dynamic entirely. So part of that messy, ugly, sometimes process is reconciling and agreeing on not only the threat, but the understanding of what their interconnectedness of the environment looks like in a way that one individual operator may or may not see. So I might see that an American Airlines has perhaps a wider view of certain things, but some other airlines who are potentially, for example, a smaller or an individual pipeline might not be thinking about some of their connection points and what that looks like. Can you talk about, from your perspective, that's the part that's sometimes really hard to explain to people, that is actually okay, that is actually a positive part of the process. You've all sat through this several times. How do you get people comfortable with going through it? How do you get them to commit to it, to get to the other end, to put their trust in that process? And happy to start with whoever would like to jump in.
Do you want to go, sir?
Sure, I'll start and I'll be brief. I think the first thing to do is you've got to build a well of trust, right? Because if you don't have trust with your key partners, it's very hard to have some of the follow-on conversations. The other thing you need to be able to do is to accept some criticism of things that you might have done, right? Particularly when that criticism might start manifesting itself in the media. And so you just need to respect that. And really, to me, it's how do you handle it? How do you address the criticism that you might be receiving? Some of it may be warranted, some maybe not. So I think developing that level of trust and then continuing the communications along the way. The final thing I would say is that we committed and we've done a pretty good job of this is as we see other owners and operators developing their cybersecurity implementation plans, it's basically, hey, the set of things that for their business they propose to do to achieve the security outcomes that we've established. One of the things that helps build that trust and helps make people feel a little bit more comfortable is when you can call out some of the best practices from that group, anonymize them, because you don't want to attribute to any one particular owner-operator, and just basically say, hey, to be able to achieve network segmentation, for example. Here are some of the best practices that we have seen, and just push that out to the industry, because nothing says, and the beauty of the way this regulation is constructed is, you can change the things you want to do whenever you want. You just need to change your plan and then have us approve the plan. But there's a lot of flexibility built into it. So think of, all of the learning that we've done. I can tell you, in terms of, if you took me, for example, of my knowledge of this, which wasn't all that basic. I had some because I was on the cyber solarium, and I worked this issue a little bit in the past, but I didn't have a deep level of expertise. And if you compared kind of what I can have a good conversation about now compared to 2.5 years ago, it's night and day difference. And that's a great credit to our industry partners saying, hey, we see what you want to do, but let me tell you how that's going to manifest itself in our business. It doesn't make sense. Lastly, when you have a set of cyber activities that are different, operator to operator, it actually builds up security in and of itself, because if a threat actor has the recipe, if you will, these are the things that all of these owners operators are going to be doing, it makes the attack surface much simpler for them. If each owner operator has their own way of addressing it, that makes it a little bit harder.
Yeah, I want to echo the administrator's comments. Trust and communication are critical. They're both formal and informal processes. TSA, a lot of times when there's a security directive, emergency amendment, or a rule that's going to be put out there's a formal process, but I think the informal process is even more important. We have regular dialogue, either independently, American Airlines, and through Airlines for America, meet on a regular basis at both the staff level and at a senior level, not only to address cybersecurity issues, but any type of security issues. So that level of communication is critical. We know, and it's a battle between what business knows and what government wants to achieve. And cyber's a new topic. Mm-hmm. The subject matter expertise is sometimes a challenge in government, and we want to be part of the solution. As I said before, it's a shared interest, and we continue to work with TSA, and they've been very responsive to industry input. And we understand some things allow more time, other things are more emergent based on the threat.
I'll just add two very brief anecdotes, and I think the first that underscore the points you just heard. But prior to the Colonial Pipeline incident, PHMSA, who does not have jurisdiction over cybersecurity, physical security, invited our regulated community, as we did inspections of pipeline facilities, to engage on questions that relate to the nexus of security and safety. About 50% of the operators that we invited to have dialogue with took us up on that opportunity. Since the incident, 100% engage in that voluntary dialogue. I'm an attorney. I understand, there's always risks when you're talking to a regulator, but I think we live in a new era where you've got a threat that morphs, again on the daily, weekly, monthly, yearly basis, and so having that opportunity to dialogue is important. TSA, in that initial time period that David mentioned, really engaged leadership of the pipeline sector and other sectors. And I think, one thing we heard initially was, we can't, what you're talking about doing is from a regulatory standpoint or a directive standpoint, we don't like, it doesn't work for us. Okay, well, that's helpful feedback, but what would really be helpful is what would work, right? And so that communication, it's not just communication, but constructive communication would be helpful. And there's certainly lots of constructive communication as well, and I think that's allowed sort of a leap in where the sector is and its threat readiness.
I might just note, some of the audience may not be as knowledgeable about the fact that these agencies have a different type of regulatory authority than regulatory authority writ large. The ability to issue a security directive, a safety directive in the event of something urgent and emergent, the ability to set a standard plan and then make modifications where you're then allowed to have sort of it's not exactly a negotiated rulemaking, but you really just talk to the actual owner-operators. You don't have to go through the lengthy Federal Register, have 6,000 comments from people who aren't actually on the inside doing the work that promotes that collaboration. I know not everybody agrees with me, but I actually think this is a better way of doing regulation because it actually lets the people who have to be part of the conversation actually talk directly to each other, not just solely through a very formal process. I see that as one of the strengths towards achieving goals in this sort of outcome. Maybe you all can add what you think, some of the strengths you've seen to date, the things that you would like to see continue to build off of as we talk about more of these types of emergent concerns or considerations. What else should be built off in this arena?
Well, thanks for raising the difference in the regulatory framework, if you will, because if you think about pipelines and first major pipeline ransomware attack that impacted a lot of people, May of 2021. If we had to go through a notice and comment rulemaking, we'd still be in the comment phase of that notice and comment rulemaking. The other thing that I have seen, and I think Tristan would validate this as well, Gary, is that you just don't all of a sudden say, hey, we're going to have cybersecurity, and you have it. It takes a period of time to develop that. And really, the expertise in cyber sometimes can be hard to come by, and it's a very competitive environment for individuals with that talent set. So, being able to close a known security or a safety gap quickly, but with some level of due process is very, very important to us. And we have a requirement by our own regulatory structure that on the surface transportation side, so for pipelines and rail systems and cyber, for example, we eventually do have to go through a notice of proposed rulemaking and the full rulemaking process. But to Patty's point, one of the things we've been able to do is every year we renew our cybersecurity directives because we learn. And what we've said to the industry is, hey, help us with this, because when it gets time, when you see the notice of proposed rulemaking come out, guess what? It's going to be very, very similar to the current directive that you have. And then as we learn some things additionally between the time of the NPRM and the final rule, we reserve the right to get smarter, and we reserve the right to make this even stronger and even better. But it's an incredibly helpful tool. It really serves the American public in a very, very beneficial way because it allows us to close known security gaps as quickly as we can, and really does engender great coordination and collaboration with the industry. Because if you didn't collaborate with your industry partners, you should expect that the industry will try to end that process, right? Where if we all see that, hey, there's some really good benefit for the United States and its citizens and the residents in this country, let's do this, but let's make sure we keep the dialogue going and we keep improving the process that we have in place.
One model of collaboration between industry and government, and even involves a foreign government, Administrator Pekoski, is the Transatlantic Industry Roundtable. I know it's something very important to the aviation industry, something we've worked very closely with you on, the One-Stop Security Initiative. Industry is always looking for ways to work with TSA to not only improve security, but improve the passenger experience. And the One-Stop Initiative with the Transatlantic Industry Roundtable is an initiative where we eliminate redundancies where countries have like security regimes. Why waste those limited, scarce resources? So we're able to eliminate some of the redundancies and redirect those resources to other security priorities, and at the same time improve the passenger experience. But that's, I think, a very good example of collaboration between both industry and government.
And the very same fundamentals apply. When you're working a one-stop security arrangement, for example, you're working that arrangement with the international government that you're working with and the individual airport within that country's borders that you're going to use as a last point of departure airport. What that really forces you to do in a very positive way is to literally look under the hood of each other's security systems and be able to ascertain, hey, are these two security systems comparable? Not exactly the same, but are they comparable to each other? So that if we had screening being done in an airport in Europe, for example, Could we get to the point where we in the United States would deem that to be comparable to U.S. screening because we've looked very carefully at it? And it takes a special partner to show some of the, not just the good things that you're doing, but some of the challenges that you have. What we find in doing that is that we generally see the threat the same. We have different ways to mitigate it. And it really just drilling down into, hey, I mitigate it this way, you mitigate it that way. Which one makes the most sense for both of us? And what has happened in the first one-stop arrangement that we're working, which I won't go into a lot of detail yet on, but we have both modified our systems to the positive. So it gives you better security. For each of our countries, that means inbound flights are more secure because they're comparable to our new improved standard. To Gary's point, a whole lot more efficiency. I mean, if you have a comparable system, there really should be no need to rescreen people when they arrive in your country, and a huge improvement in passenger customer experience. I mean, if you're a customer flying from Europe to the United States, you have follow-on U.S. domestic travel, to not have to get rescreened saves you, in terms of going out into the public area, back into the sterile area of an airport. There's an hour probably there, and you also don't have to retrieve your check bag. It goes literally from tail to tail in the aircraft because we've already screened the check bags before they're even loaded in the international location. So there's this huge benefit for this. And the TAIR, the Transatlantic Industry Roundtable, is a partnership, again, with the industry, airlines and airports, and the governments at the ministerial level. So we have very high-level interest in this. And really, this authority was just granted by the Congress in December 23rd of last year in the NDAA. So I expect and hope that within a year or maybe just slightly beyond that, we'll be able to announce the first prototype of this. Think about that in terms of speed of government and industry action on something that's better for everybody. So it's really a great initiative. Thanks.
Well, and I'll just underscore that example is an example of creating sort of an avenue to communicate. We are focused on trying to do that from how to encourage industry to communicate amongst the varying solutions that an individual operator or regulated entity may have, to training our friends at the TSA on what we do to mitigate risk from safety, to the extent that's helpful, as TSA looks at mitigating risk from security and cybersecurity. So it's creating those avenues for communication. Obviously, anybody can call each other up at any point, but if you sort of add in an impetus to do that and to build those relationships and trust, then I think you get better communication.
So one last thing I do want to just summarize up from my perspective is this also means that there's a really good investment, not just in expertise, subject matter expertise in, say, cyber, but domain expertise. And also, frankly, the regulatory flexibility, ability to think about compliance in a different way, the ability to say what are the right incentives, because in the end, we all want to do better, right? This needs to be less about sort of the traditional argument. Reserve that for the folks who really aren't getting there, and we know that some won't. But look for ways that those who want to work together are incentivized to continue to do so. Recognizing we have 7 minutes left, I am going to open up and see if we've gotten a few questions from the audience. I know someone will have a question. Otherwise, I'll call on somebody. Chris is going to get called on.
You need a mic? Yeah.
Thank you for making eye contact, Krista.
That's why, it's in class. They say you're supposed to sit in the T zone. That's what I was told, if you want the teacher to know you're paying attention. Wanted to follow up. Earlier, sir, we talked about the capital investment plan, and we talked a little bit about One Stop. And, I wanted to make sure everyone in the audience knew to read the capital investment plan. It's a really great document that a lot of work goes into. Would love your perspective on how having those types of strategic documents changes both the engagement with industry, but also the kind of culture and planning within the agency.
Yeah, no, thanks, Krista. And our capital investment plan, we have both a constrained capital investment plan and an unconstrained capital investment plan that we submit to the House and Senate Appropriations Committees. hugely valuable tool, because that way we can telegraph, hey, these are the things that we plan to invest in the future, and then here is when we'll finally get to full operating capability for certain new capabilities. And sometimes when you look at those FOC, full operating capability dates, it causes a lot of conversation, which is very beneficial for some of our very important capital investment projects, like for our new computed tomography or CAT scan X-ray systems. We won't, on the current trajectory of funding, we won't finish that project until 2049. It's an incredibly long period of time, right? So across the US system of 430 airports, you're going to have different technology in place in small airports, medium airports, and large airports. So it allows you to have that conversation and really look at hard numbers going forward. It also requires the agency to continue to look way over the horizon in what they're doing, and to plan not just the capital costs, but the maintenance and staffing costs that new technology will put in place. Very, very importantly, it also provides the industry, if they can see what your plans are, industry will make more decisions that might be advantageous to capability development in their R&D investments. If they can see, hey, this is a long-term project, this is the agency's commitment to do this over the course of many years, I might put together a few more R&D dollars because my return is a little bit more certain than if I had no information whatsoever. I do think this is a huge step forward in being transparent in government. Just cards face up on the table, here's the projects, here's what they cost, here's when they're going to get done. The other part of the conversation that's very important is, as many of you know, our funding is offset by the revenues from what's called the 9/11 security fee that every passenger pays when they buy a plane ticket. It's $560 one way, $1120 round trip. In 2013, in the balanced budget agreement, there was a decision to take what is now in FY24 dollars, $1.6 billion of those fee revenues and divert them from aviation security over into the Department of Treasury for deficit reduction. And so what we have been saying consistently is, hey, stop this diversion. $1.6 billion is a lot of money. If we could earmark a portion of that, let's say we earmark $400 or $500 million for checked baggage investment, $400 or $500 million for checkpoint investment. And if you knew that those earmarks of funds were there, if I'm in the industry and I make identity verification equipment, for example, or X-ray technology, I know that the addressable market is going to be reasonably steady, and that I can make, to my point earlier, more significant R&D investments, which benefits everybody, and we get better technology as a result, and hopefully at an overall lower cost. Plus, if you buy it a little bit faster, it tends to lower the net total.
Recognizing we are 2 minutes and 40 seconds left, I want to give you each a chance to have your last word. If you have one thing you want the audience to walk away remembering from this panel, from this conversation, what would it be? And I'm going to pick on Gary first.
Oh, goodness. That the aviation industry is a partner with government, and we're committed to the security and facilitation of our passengers.
Very nice. Sir?
Aviation is back in a big, big way. Over the course of the summer, 2.5 million passengers on average every day for the entire summer. That's the highest it's ever been in TSA's history. Yesterday was about 2.6 million passengers. Yesterday, no particularly special day. It was a Columbus Day, it was a holiday, right? But it wasn't like 4th of July or Labor Day in terms of passenger volumes. High passenger volumes. Associated with that is lots of air cargo moving. So we have a tremendous opportunity to continue to grow the aviation sector, the pipeline sector, the rail sector, because transportation underpins the health of this economy overall. The other thing I would say is that, and I had an opportunity to do some public affairs spots with Jen Easterly, who's the director of CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, this morning at Reagan Airport. And one of the things we talked about is, hey, when we partner together, whether it's agency to agency or agency, industry, agency, private citizen, when we partner together, we come up with better solutions, we come up with more transparency, and we come up with better trust. And when I look at the threat vectors that we face today, we need to have passengers feel like they can approach us and say, hey, I'm seeing something I'm concerned about. I just want to give you that TSA. So I trust that you're going to do what needs to be done with it. It's going to be critically important for our long-term success.
And I would just emphasize this notion of communication, but in this city, I think this is a good example over the last few years that TSA has led and how to improve communication through a whole host of means, because that's ultimately, as most of what we described today was sharing of information to solve big, complex problems. And I think there are opportunities, instead of Congress' typical sort of siloing of problems into very distinct jurisdictions, finding ways to actually try the best we can to remove some of that siloing by encouraging collaboration or secundancies across agency or across the private sector with government as well. So manifesting that communication.
Brilliant. Thank you very much to all three of you. Really appreciated the conversation.
Thanks, Patty.
Thanks, Patty.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.